Look, D&D sessions can be really tricky and kind of unnerving to create because you don't know what your party's going to do in response to your encounters. There could be situations where your party outsmarts you, or they could just roll horribly and have bad luck on that day. And that's where the challenge comes in. But I often find myself asking the question of, is this too far? Should I retcon this? And that's a topic I think is kind of interesting because there's a few things that I personally like to consider when I'm deciding whether or not I should retcon an encounter. The first thing I consider is, what was the outcome? Second thing is kind of, did my players really have fun with this encounter? And third is, how much does it really impact my story? If my players absolutely break a session and destroy a low-level boss, that's not really as much of a deal as if they were to, let's say, destroy my big bad, in which then I kind of have to rebuild my whole campaign. So there's a lot of things that you should be considering, and I kind of want to go through some of the instances that I found myself using retcons for. Now, if you're anything like me, and you're thinking about retconning, you're probably thinking about the horrible TPK gone wrong. And while that is something that a lot of DMs, including myself, feel the need to think about, I find that it's not my most common use for this. And yeah, while this does hit all the boxes, I actually like to sit down and kind of try to find fun and interesting ways to use the potentially horrible outcome of a TPK as a more enjoyable storytelling component. I find myself using retcons the most often for puzzles. That being said, I kind of want to dive into that a little bit later. For right now, let's kind of back it up and go back to how can you retcon an encounter in kind of a smooth way. And I've really only found a few options. The first kind of being just to sit down and have a conversation with your players. Be like, hey, this is why I want to go back. I don't think we had fun. Can we sit and basically redo this whole session? And while, yeah, I do find that personally to be pretty successful, there are times where it's not the best option. You also have, the whole situation with a chronomancer now being a thing in the official books, where you could have them time travel back or forward to kind of deal with some different things and change the past. And it's an interesting storytelling component, but I don't find myself using this one very much, mostly because then I feel like I'm shoehorning in a chronomancer in these situations. The third option that I find myself using fairly often, I would say, is going with some sort of like dimensional wibbly wobbly Doctor Who style stuff. And while this is a lot of fun, I don't think everyone particularly likes it. So kind of decide what you want to do. Now, the fourth option that I have for retconning comes from when I make a horrible mistake. When I give my party an item or a magic spell that is just way too far off the rails. Now, when you're retconning and you're making homebrew spells, you really don't want to take power away from your players. You'd rather them be weak and then give it more power. But in the rare occasion that you do, with items, this is a lot easier. The next time they see it, just change the rarity of the item that you had. If you had a rare item that was absolutely insane, maybe make that a legendary and then create a more toned down version to give them. And I find this to be super useful. Now with spells, I do usually just sit down and talk with the player and go, hey, this spell was a little crazy. I don't think we should be able to destroy the entire army by ourselves. Let's kind of look at some ways where we could revamp this to be fun for you and also tone down the power a little bit. And I think the communication part is really important because if you don't communicate it, it can feel like it's just a punishment for them creatively using a spell. Now, I will say that is my most common use other than puzzles. And the reason that I find myself using that a lot is because I do like to give my players homebrew stuff. Yeah, there's a lot in the books, but sometimes there's just this item that I've got cooking in my head that would just perfectly fit the story element that me and my players have for a character. And that's often where I will go wrong, is I'll build these situations where I'm kind of hurting myself. So that's the time where I usually have to take a step back, kind of retcon what the item does. Now, I will say with puzzles, I think it's really important to consider retconning them if they go poorly. The reason for this is oftentimes, much like a lot of advice in D&D, you don't want to trap something behind a skill check or something. I feel the same way about puzzles. Sometimes you're going to make a really great puzzle that's just way too hard, or it might seem obvious to you, but not to your party. And at some point, if your players aren't having fun, it's not really worth keeping. And this is a personal mentality that I've especially developed in recently. And it always makes me think back to the Comic-Con interview that Matthew Mercer did a few years ago, mentioning rules that really don't fit the party.
If a rule is truly preventing somebody from like really enjoying a moment, it's not worth being a hard ass about it, and we'll find a way to bend it or find a way to get around it or how to utilize other rules to make it make sense in the moment to where we can still let them have a moment.
But I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts. What are some situations where you've had to retcon something? Maybe it be a spell, an item, or just a whole encounter. What is the most common use for you? And also, I'm building out a new studio right now, so my walls are a little bit blank. If you have any ideas for things that should go in my studio, let me know. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Remember to stay inspired.